Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Maps and Metaphors. This is Pranav, and today we have Palak with us on this episode as a co host. So, welcome, Palak.
Hey, thanks for having me in this episode.
Yes, so let's get started. Today we are going to talk about the origin and evolution of cutlery. So, tell me one thing, Palak. What comes to your mind when I say the word cutlery?
Well, cutlery means the spoons, forks, and knives, I suppose, that we use on a daily basis.
Yeah, of course, it's very obvious, right? But do you know anything about the history of cutlery?
It's a very good question, and I never thought about it. Do you know anything about it? Then please do share it.
Yeah, just something very basic, such as like cutlery basically means knife, a knife to cut, and it has come up as a term only in the recent like 13th or 14th century, and it's a very British term, let's say. In the earlier times, cutlery meant the craft of knife making, basically, right? And eventually, like it got into the meaning of to cut something. But later, when I'm mentioning 13th or 14th century, it it got associated more with the eating utensils, but still it was only the knives. So the cutlery would only means like knives. So that was something, but over the period of time, uh, other cutleries also got added to it. It was not only just knives, but became knives, then forks, and also spoons. So yeah, if you look at the whole timeline, it's actually quite recent, 13th, 14th century. I would say like still you can trace it back and still have some references in the historical records or
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Can you go a bit in detail about it, like more more information on this topic?
yeah, certainly. So, I mean, if we look at the cutlery, it's technically a tool, right? So even if we talk about like early humans, millions of years ago, they were probably also using some sort of cutlery. I mean, if we think about it like a little bit in a connected sense or in a little bit logical way, so the even the stones, the sharp stones that were used for cutting, that they were also sort of a cutlery, right?
Okay.
So it does have its reference from millions of years ago, and it is mostly I'm talking about the Stone Age, but like later as we progressed, so more uh, when people say about the ages, especially in the region of Europe, right? So let's say the Bronze Age, that was the first time the metal cutlery was used, and it was quite popular in the eastern parts. Um, and then there was more advanced cutleries, and then there was a use of bronze and silver cutleries in ancient Egypt. There are references of it. And then later, during the Iron Age, iron-based cutleries were used actually in most of the parts of the world. So that's another reference. And then in the times of ancient Rome, uh, well, silver-based cutleries were also used. Were actually used because and it was something to do with the status or the status symbol. So the riches would mostly be able to afford and actually use. So yeah, and after like the ancient Rome, it started like the Middle Ages. So if we are very much talking in context with Europe, because Europe has a much reference where the whole timeline is understood in terms of ages. So yeah, I mean that's why I'm going with that reference. So in the Middle Ages, there was also steel-based cutleries introduced. So it was actually the iron was not gone, but like along with the iron, steel was also getting used. But do you know like if in the Middle Ages, all the three cutleries were used, like fork, spoon, and knife.
No, I really don't know about it.
Yeah, I also learned recently that it was not common to use a fork until the 16th century.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So the fork was only used after or during 16th century and onwards. Before that, people were mostly reliant on knives and spoons. But it seems very practical as well, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And very logical, actually. Like that's what I meant because spoons are usually used for stirring, and knives are basically used for cutting anything. Or so they probably made a good combination together, and then fork was more like something that was introduced later. So yeah, that's a little bit of a highlight of a little bit back in time and till the recent years, and in the modern times, of course, like we are, and the whole world is quite familiar with the cutleries and especially the metal cutleries. So it's not a big deal.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. But like we covered mostly about the forks, the knives, and the spoons. I'm more curious to know about the chopsticks. So if you know anything about it, like where do they fit in? Are they really the part of cutleries or they are in some separate section? Please share if you have any information about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really interesting point because yeah, I mean, a lot of studies say that, of course, chopsticks do fall in the category of cutleries, and they have a very interesting story also behind it. And they are mostly popular in the east of Asia. All the East Asian countries use the chopsticks, and they are pretty comfortable with that. So yeah, I mean, there are many factors why these countries started using the chopsticks, and the metal use was a little bit lesser and lesser. I think the few of the reasons is like the bamboo, availability of bamboo could be one thing, and I also read about it. So well, if you say about cutlery, there is a thing to consider. A lot of times we use or like mix up the terms. So cutlery basically means like when we are eating something on the table, uh, we use those as a tool to consume the food, right? But most of the times you don't say that cutlery is used for food preparation. Like that's really a modern reference in the current times. If you speak to someone, cutlery, they would always reference it as a tool to consume your food from the table, right? But in China, when you say about cutleries, or sorry, the chopsticks, they were used mostly for cooking, and that has a reference from the Shang dynasty, and that was in 1600 BC till somewhere around 1046 or like 1046 BC. That was the Shang dynasty, and the chopsticks were firstly used there in those times, and they were only used for the cooking, for the food preparation. So, did you know that?
No, I don't know that.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I also discovered about it a little bit recently. Well, and interestingly, down the line, like there are many theories behind it why the chopsticks in the east of Asia um got from only for cooking as a utensil, like a cooking utensil, to a chopstick to consume your food. There are two theories behind it. One is like, or there could be more, but like that, there are two theories that I know. One is about the famous philosopher in China that is called Master Kong. This guy was a vegetarian guy, and he said like a knife reminds him of slaughterhouses. So he wanted to promote more and more of vegetarian way of living, and so he wanted like a lot of people should avoid using the knife on the table, and that was quite logical to use the chopstick in that way. But there is another theory which is that during the time of Han dynasty, which is in the year which was in the year 202 BC till 220 AD, uh, the chopsticks started getting used for eating, you know. And the reason people say was there was a rise in population in that time, and eventually like it led to the scarcity of resources in those regions, you know. And because there was a scarcity in the availability of various resources, people started cutting down their food into smaller pieces. So just imagine you have a um uh, big piece of meat. Just imagine, and then you put it on the fire. It would take quite some time to cook, right? So just to save on the resources, people started like cutting it into smaller pieces so that the food can be quickly cooked, and also maybe doing the stir frying, you know. So that's some connection there. And then eventually, like when the food pieces started becoming smaller, knives were not really necessary on the tables to cut them down, right? And that's where like the chopsticks kind of became more popular or handy uh, to be used in the uh, for eating, you know. And later they spread to countries like Japan, Vietnam, Korea, etc. So I hope this was interesting.
Yeah, it seems so interesting and so detailed about the chopsticks. So now we already talked about the fork, knives, chopsticks, um, and I think spoons. Yes, I would like to highlight on something like we are from India, and we in India people is still prefer to eat with the hands, like they
Yeah,
often.
yeah, 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 that's true.
That's true, right? So, yeah, we use these spoons to have some soupy dishes or the something curries or rice. So, what's your thought about this, like eating with the hands?
Yeah, that's that's again a very interesting question because yeah, like I think it's very cultural as well, and there are like many logical reasons behind it, which goes back in the text, the early age text. But yeah, also on the other hand, like I would like to highlight this is a very valid point because a lot of people feel that eating by hands is very odd, you know. Uh, but we come from that culture, and we know that it is for a reason, and it's a very logical explanations behind it. But yeah, so the thing is, I would like to mention about Ayurveda, which is which is also called as science of life, and it was compiled over 5,000 years ago. Could be a little bit older as well, you know. So there are many references of why should you eat with hands, and you know, all the sensory organs, and all the things related to, you know, with that practice. Um, so I will highlight one point, you know, which is like eating with hands uh, basically includes your five fingers, you know, and your five fingers actually represent five elements. So these five elements are like that exist in the nature. So basically like fire, water, earth, air, and space, you know. So that means like when you're eating with hands, you're basically in connect with all of these elements, and you're touching your food. So that's another thing which is of course connected, but I would like to break it down and maybe just explain it a bit. So it's something related to sensory organs as well. So just imagine you are having a very tasty dish in front of you. So your sensory organ, when you touch it, you will be able to feel the texture of food, right? And at the same time, you are also able to predict or like sense how much is it. I mean, like temperature of the food, basically, like if it's too hot or too cold to eat. So that kind of gives your brain a signal, and then it triggers the whole chemical process inside, which means that it is your hands are not like something external to you, right? So they are connected. There are sensory organs, so it sends signals to your brain. So it actually stimulates more of, let's say, maybe saliva or like some chemical processes inside, which eventually will help you to have a better digestion, and better absorption of nutrients also. That's the theory behind it. So just that's a little bit of a thing, and it's very interesting to me also.
Okay. That's good to know. Like, it's very interesting information about the Ayurveda included in this part.
Yeah, and also I wanted to mention like eating with hands does not mean there are no utensils or no technology to have the cutleries or the utensils. Why I'm saying is like there are some evidences of a very old civilization actually in this whole world, like the Harappan civilization, which was around which is also called as Indus Valley civilization, and it also has a reference of more than 5,000 years old. It to be 5,000 years old. There were during the excavation, like at the sites. The archaeologists have found like utensils made up of bronze, copper, or clay. Very like very interesting or very like modern looking utensils, which no one would imagine like coming. They are coming from from like they are 5,000 years old. Uh, so, for example, like big stirring spoons or like pots and pans made up of such materials, just I mentioned. So they were already there. So it means like the whole cooking art was of course like very mature, and eating by hand was actually a choice, and backing it with such principles of Ayurveda, but not because it was probably not possible, or people did not know about it. So probably they knew, but like they had such thought and they were backing it, their practices with that.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's good. Like Ayurveda and Harappan culture go hand in hand.
yeah, to some extent, I think I also don't have a perfect knowledge, and I'm not an expert in that. But like, I could draw some references from it, and I think, yeah, a lot of things are still getting discovered. A lot of things are not known, but like, a lot of evidences from the archaeological sites and from archaeologists. This is what we learn and
Okay.
we get to know.
Okay, that's good. One last question to you. Yeah, so we almost covered everything about the forks, spoons, knives, and chopsticks, and also why people use hands to eat food. I would like to ask you one last question. Like, what do you think, why cutleries are important around the world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there are like some basic things that makes it important. I think one is like convenience. It's just a tool, and for a lot of people, it just adds a convenience to consume food. The second could be the hygiene and health, which seems to be really a bigger factor. And last could be something about the cultural significance. But if you look at it, they all are kind of interrelated, right? So, for example, like if we see, uh, it's quite common to use cutleries in almost, I mean, I think almost the whole Western countries, or let's say the cold countries, they all use the cutleries. But if you look at it logically, in the time, uh, there must have been like a scarcity of water at the room temperature, let's say. And the historical records also say there were times that the availability of clean water was also quite scarce. But on the other hand, like there are many studies that support that people have always, have known or probably were practicing to boil the water, but like the only reason I can think is most of the times is about the winter or the cold, and just the convenience, because just imagine you are at a place. Right now, it's something else, in the modern times. You have a running water, you have central heating system, and you can always have, in your taps, hot water or like partially hot, lukewarm, whatever you want. But like imagine in those times, maybe 1,000 years ago or even before that, where like people were really struggling with the basics, clean water, running water, also heated water, let's say. So just imagine before you have to eat something, you have to wash your hand, because if you don't, you might get a lot of germs into the food, and eventually that will get into your stomach and make you sick. Yeah. And once you're done with the food, also you have to wash your hands. But just imagine the cold water is could irritate us a lot. I think we have one memory of consuming cold water to wash our hands. There was a breakdown of our central heating system. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. It was a tough day for us.
Yeah, so like just imagine like it was sort of a realization,
Yeah.
how life is easy and we take it for granted. But yeah, I mean, just imagine like those times it would have been so difficult, like people working all day, all night, and there's so limited resources, less luxury, and they have to do all this. So maybe someone thought like, okay, let's start using cutleries, and that's where it has all evolved. And you would also see that over the period of time, this was a necessity, and over the period of time, it has become and grown into a culture. So it signifies something, and it has a lot of story, as we already learned about different ages and the different kind of metals that were used. So people do have stories behind it, like a memory behind it, or written history. So that becomes more like a cultural significance. And on the other hand, when we talk about cultures which prefer to still eat by hands, I think we were already talking about India, and I know a lot of places still in Africa that do it. I think it's very obvious to think, because geographically these regions are placed on the latitude which are giving the best of the weather. The climate is not harsh. It's warm, comfortable. It could really get hot sometimes, but on the other hand, the convenience is that your water straight from the river, or maybe to your home, it would be just a normal room temperature. Of course, like there would be winter sometimes, it could be annoying, but most of the times of the year, I think you don't need a central heating system. And then people could actually practice washing their hands before and after, which would lead to better practices around health and hygiene. So that's very much logical, right? If you see the connection that way. And actually, there's another thing. In Europe, like it became more and more accepted because of adoption of germ theory as well. That's somehow I'm talking about the reference of breakout of cholera around 1854 in London. I think there is a book which talks a lot about it. The Ghost Map. It's from Stephen Johnson. And people earlier in Europe were never. I mean, like they did not believe in the germ theory. At least in general, I would say there was not an acceptance of the germ theory. But after this and proving it, people started accepting it, and then like it became even more kind of accepted, and even the forks were later introduced, and those kind of things are there. So yeah, this is the whole story around the cutlery and details. I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very fascinating to get all these details about cutlery. Um, Thanks. Now I have more information about the origin and the evolution of the cutlery, I can say. Thank you again, Pranav.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope you guys also enjoyed this conversation, and thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye bye.